Welcome, everyone. I'm truly grateful you've joined us tonight. As you settle in, let the calm stories under the stars and the soft tunes of the moon embrace your heart. Take a deep, soothing breath and allow the quiet magic of voice to guide you gently toward peaceful dreams. If you enjoy these moments of relaxation, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps keep the stories flowing. Now let's begin, where every word is meant to calm and comfort. The Last Letter from Saigon, 1975. In the waning light of April 1975, Saigon was a city on the edge of oblivion. The once proud metropolis, a hub of vibrant life and bustling commerce, now trembled beneath the weight of its own collapse. The streets, so full of promise just months before, overflowed with refugees and desperate souls clutching their meager belongings. Neon signs flickered uncertainly against the smoky haze, and the air was heavy with the acrid scent of burning fuel and shattered dreams. In the midst of this chaos worked Dr. Evelyn Drake, an American journalist whose determination to report the truth was matched only by the personal cost of her relentless pursuit. Evelyn's eyes, lined with worry and fatigue, had witnessed the horrors of war, and yet they burned with a fierce compassion. Every photograph she snapped and every line she wrote was an effort to capture not just the devastation, but also the enduring human spirit that struggled to survive amid the turmoil. Evelyn's own past was marred by loss, a loss that haunted her like a ghost, even in the brightest moments. She had come to Saigon with the hope of bearing witness to history, but as the final hours of the city's resistance drew near, that hope was slowly being consumed by despair. And then, in the midst of the disintegration of order, fate intervened. It was during one of the frantic rushes for safety that Evelyn first encountered Lynn, a Vietnamese interpreter assigned to assist the foreign press. Lynn was unlike anyone Evelyn had ever met. With dark, soulful eyes that seemed to hold a universe of sorrow and quiet resilience, Lynn carried the unspoken burdens of her people with a dignity that both comforted and captivated Evelyn. Their first conversation was brief, a soft murmur away from the cacophony of officials and panicked crowds. In a corner of a dilapidated building turned temporary press center, Lynn spoke in measured tones. "Madam Drake," she said, her voice gentle yet imbued with an unmistakable gravity, "I have seen the worst that this war has to offer. Yet in your eyes, I glimpse a spark of hope that refuses to die." Evelyn, used to keeping her heart guarded behind a veneer of professionalism, found herself drawn to Lynn's sincerity. In that fleeting moment, a connection was forged, a bond that transcended language and circumstance. The interpreter's compassionate presence became a quiet beacon in the relentless darkness, and Evelyn knew that their fates were now intertwined in ways neither could have foreseen. In the days that followed, as Saigon descended further into chaos and the imminence of its fall grew undeniable, Evelyn and Lynn began to meet in secret. Amid the ruins of crumbling government offices and bombed-out streets, they whispered plans of escape in hushed voices, their words laced with urgency and a tender hope for redemption. Evelyn's contacts in the international press had managed to secure a fragile visa, a slender lifeline that promised safe passage out of the doomed city. Yet for Lynn, The idea of leaving was fraught with heartache. Saigon was her home, a land filled with both treasured memories and unbearable loss. Still, the relentless tide of chaos left her little choice. In private meetings, away from the watchful eyes of the authorities, the two women meticulously charted a route to an old airfield on the outskirts of the city, where the final evacuation helicopter was scheduled to depart. One rainy evening, in a cramped room lit only by the flickering flame of a candle, Evelyn laid out the plan before Lynn. "The helicopter is our only chance," she said, her voice trembling with both hope and sorrow. "I have been given a visa that can take me out of here, but I cannot bear the thought of leaving you behind in this shattered city." Evelyn paused, her eyes searching Lynn's face for understanding. "I want you to come with me. I want to carry you with me, even if only in memory." Lynn's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded. "Evelyn, I have always known that fate is cruel, but I also believe that love can defy even the harshest of destinies. If it is meant to be, then I will go with you, and if we are separated, I will keep our memories alive, no matter what happens." In that intimate, desperate moment, Evelyn retrieved a small, leather-bound envelope from her bag. Inside was a handwritten, forged letter, a final token of their bond. With careful, looping script, the letter read, "Find me in our next life." The words, simple yet imbued with profound meaning, were both a promise and a plea, a promise that their connection would endure, even if fate forced them apart in this life. As the days turned to weeks, and the chaotic pulse of Saigon reached its fevered peak, the situation grew ever more perilous. The streets were filled with the wounded and the desperate. Buildings crumbled under the weight of relentless bombings, and the anguished cries of those left behind echoed through the narrow alleys. Yet, even in this maelstrom of despair, Evelyn and Lynn clung to their secret hope. Late one bitter afternoon, with rain pelting the cracked pavement and the distant rumble of artillery growing ever more ominous, Evelyn and Lynn met one last time before the final evacuation. They gathered in the shadow of a derelict warehouse near the edge of the city, a place that had once been a bustling market, but now lay silent, a testament to the collapse of order. The dim glow of a solitary street lamp cast long, trembling shadows, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and salt from the nearby harbor. There, in that fragile moment of quiet amid the storm, Evelyn pressed the visa and the forged letter into Lynn's hands. "Take these," she whispered, her voice heavy with sorrow. "This visa is my only ticket out of Saigon, but I want you to have this letter, a reminder of our bond, of the love we shared in the midst of chaos. Find me in our next life, Lynn. Let it be a promise that even if fate tears us apart now, our souls will one day be reunited." Lynn clutched the envelope tightly, her eyes reflecting the tumult of emotions within. "I promise, Evelyn," she said softly, "I will hold on to this letter, and I will never forget you. I will carry your words in my heart, and I will do everything I can to keep our hope alive." As thunder rumbled overhead and the first hints of the city's final collapse reverberated through the air, the two women embraced briefly, a farewell filled with both desperation and a tender certainty. With heavy hearts, they parted ways. Evelyn joined the throngs of evacuees making their way to the airfield, while Lynn, with the letter pressed close to her chest, stayed behind to help those too weak or too desperate to leave. In the chaos of the final hours, Saigon transformed into a scene of unbearable tragedy. Refugees flooded the streets, and the clamor of desperate voices mingled with the screeching of tires and the wail of sirens. Amid this tumult, the old airfield emerged as a beacon of hope, a last vestige of order in a city falling apart. It was here that the final evacuation flight was scheduled to depart, a single helicopter standing as the last lifeline to safety. Evelyn and countless others hustled through the rain-soaked streets toward the airfield. The cold drizzle blurred the neon glow of streetlights, and the air was heavy with the smell of smoke and salt. Every step was fraught with danger, the threat of looters, stray gunfire, and the ever-present uncertainty of a collapsing regime. At the airfield, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Military personnel hurried to load passengers into the helicopter, their faces set in grim determination. Amid the clamor, Evelyn's eyes met those of a stern officer who barked, "Last call. Get aboard now if you want to leave." Her heart pounded as she clutched her bag tightly, the visa and the letter, a precious reminder of her bond with Lynn. With one final look back at the darkened, burning skyline of Saigon, a city that had been her home and her torment, Evelyn boarded the helicopter. The rotors began to churn the stormy air, lifting her into the uncertain embrace of the night. She felt a profound sense of loss as the city fell away beneath her, and the silence of the flight was filled with the echoes of her final farewell. In the days and weeks that followed, the chaos of Saigon's fall became a distant, painful memory for many who had escaped. Yet for Evelyn, the wounds of that night remained raw and unhealed. In the quiet solitude of a temporary refugee camp, she sat for hours with her notebook, documenting every detail of the tragedy and the lives lost. Her writings were a desperate attempt to capture the unbearable pain of separation, the haunting beauty of a city in ruins, and the eternal hope that somehow love might persist amid the desolation. Each night, as she lay awake under a canvas tent and listened to the murmur of the wind, Evelyn's thoughts turned repeatedly to Lynn. The forged letter, those simple words, "Find me in our next life," became her mantra, a fragile promise that their love was not entirely extinguished by fate. In the midst of overwhelming grief and the burdens of survival, she found solace in writing letters she would never send, folding them carefully into the repaired music box that had once belonged to her mother. For 50 long years, that music box remained a silent witness to Evelyn's enduring heartache and unwavering hope. As she grew older, the melody that it played, a gentle folk tune that her mother used to sing, haunted her every waking moment. In the quiet hours of her long nights as a piano tuner in the upscale salons of London, Evelyn would often play that familiar song, each note a bittersweet reminder of the love she had lost and the promise that had been left unfulfilled. By 1993, Evelyn was an elderly woman, her life marked by decades of quiet longing and unspoken sorrow. The city had changed, the wounds of war and loss having given way to the slow, steady march of time. Yet in her heart, the memory of Lynn and the promise of that final farewell burned as brightly as ever. In a small, sparsely furnished flat overlooking the Thames, Evelyn spent her final days writing one last letter, a letter that would encapsulate a lifetime of regret, hope, and the bittersweet beauty of love. Late one rainy evening, with the soft patter of raindrops on the window and the distant hum of the city below, Evelyn sat at her old writing desk. Candlelight flickered over the worn pages of her journal as she composed her final message. My dearest Lynn, I am sorry that I could not scream your name that night, that I could not reach out with the voice of my heart to keep you by my side. For 50 long years, I have tuned pianos and played the song of our lost dreams, yet I have never been able to fix the broken promise between us. I write these words with a heavy heart, knowing that fate has dealt us a cruel hand. But know this, my love for you is eternal, a quiet beacon that has guided me through the darkest nights. Find me in our next life, dear Lynn, for until then, I will carry your memory in every note I play, in every quiet moment of solitude. Forever yours, Evelyn. With trembling hands, she folded the letter and placed it inside the music box, the very box that had sheltered Luca years ago and which had come to symbolize her own enduring love. Unbeknownst to her, in the same year, a fateful twist would lead to the box being donated to a charity shop, where its secret would lie dormant for decades. 50 years later, in 2023, a reclusive war veteran named Daniel found himself wandering the streets of modern London, haunted by memories of conflict and loss. Daniel, a man burdened by guilt and tormented by the invisible scars of his past, had long sought solace in the quiet corners of his solitude. His days were spent in isolation, haunted by memories of a time when the world had seemed darker, and his own role in it filled him with regret. One rainy afternoon, while rummaging through a small charity shop in a forgotten alley of the city, Daniel's eyes fell upon an old, ornate music box. Its surface was intricately carved, and though the wood was worn with age, it retained an air of fragile beauty. Something about the box called out to him. A faint, almost imperceptible melody seemed to pulse from within, as if it were waiting to tell its own story. Daniel purchased the music box, feeling an inexplicable connection to it. That night, in the quiet solitude of his modest flat, he carefully wound the box. As the gears turned and the mechanism came to life, the music box began to play the haunting folk melody of a long-forgotten lullaby, the same song that in another life had been sung by a mother to her children during dark times. And then, as if summoned by the soft strains of the music, the box released something unexpected, a cascade of fragile yellowed letters, each one penned in delicate handwriting. As Daniel unfolded the first letter, his heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread. The letter was addressed simply to my beloved Lynn. It contained the words of a woman named Evelyn, a letter written in a time of unimaginable despair and tender hope. But as he read further, he realized that the letter was not a farewell to a lover, but a desperate, lingering promise to someone she had loved long ago. And then, in the soft background of the music box's melody, Daniel heard a voice so gentle and familiar that it stirred something deep within him. It was Luca's voice, recorded in 1943, as he whispered tenderly to Evelyn amid the rubble of a shattered world. Emmy, don't leave me. I'll be brave like you, the voice murmured, echoing in the quiet of Daniel's flat. The recording was fragile, its sound crackling with age, yet it carried an undeniable emotion, a desperate plea that transcended time. Compelled by the mystery of the music box and the letters, Daniel began to piece together the fragments of a story that spanned decades. He learned that the box had once belonged to Evelyn, a piano tuner who had spent her life searching for a lost love and clinging to memories in the form of unsent letters. Through conversations with elderly residents and meticulous research in dusty archives, Daniel discovered that Evelyn had been a woman of great sorrow and resilience, whose fate had been irrevocably intertwined with that of Lynn, a courageous interpreter from wartime Saigon. Further revelations unfolded. Luca, Evelyn's young brother, had been declared missing during the chaos of the London Blitz in 1943. In the midst of the bombings, as their lives were shattered by the relentless fury of war, Evelyn had sacrificed herself to protect Luca, losing her voice to shrapnel in the process. In the aftermath, she had written countless letters to her lost brother, letters she could never send, and folded them carefully into the repaired music box, a small relic that had come to embody her hope and her endless longing. Tragically, it was later discovered that Luca had not survived. He had died in 1945 as a child soldier in France, his only remaining possession being a drawing of Evelyn's face. The music box, once a silent keeper of her unspoken promises, had been donated to a charity shop in 1993 after Evelyn died alone. And now, 50 years later, it had found its way into Daniel's hands, a broken recipient of memories and heartache, waiting to reveal its secrets. Daniel, with each letter he read and each note of the melody he heard, felt a growing connection to the past, a deep, aching empathy for the sacrifices made and the love that endured against all odds. His own burdens as a war veteran, the guilt and the memories that haunted him, resonated with the tragic tale of Evelyn's endless quest to mend what had been broken by fate. He felt an obligation to honor her story and to carry forward the legacy of her unyielding hope. Determined to uncover the full truth, Daniel traced the letters and their origins, leading him to the neglected grave of Evelyn in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of London. There, among overgrown hedges and weathered headstones, he met Sophie, a gentle young woman with kind eyes who revealed that she was Luca's granddaughter. Sophie explained that Luca, despite his tragic end, had spent his life creating delicate drawings, a silent angel he could never name, symbols of his own hope and a tribute to the love he had shared with Evelyn. Together, Daniel and Sophie pieced together the fragments of the past. They learned that after Evelyn's death, her beloved music box had been sold and passed through many hands until it finally reached the charity shop. Luca's drawings, long forgotten in a dusty attic, had been discovered only recently by Sophie, who had kept them as a secret reminder of her grandfather's lost innocence and unfulfilled dreams. The haunting melody of the music box was, in fact, a folk tune that their mother had sung, a melody that Sophie now hummed softly to her newborn daughter, as if passing on a sacred lullaby from a time of love and loss. One clear, bittersweet evening, Daniel and Sophie decided to honor the memory of Evelyn and Luca in the very place that had once been so important to their story. They returned to an old, restored piano in a quiet, historical hall, a relic of an era when music and love were intertwined with every graceful note. As the soft light of dusk filtered through stained glass windows, Daniel carefully opened the music box and allowed the fragile letters to flutter free like delicate, forgotten memories. With trembling hands, he placed the music box beside the piano. Slowly, as if guided by the gentle hand of fate, he began to play the familiar folk melody, the very tune that had haunted Evelyn's every waking moment. The notes, tender and aching, filled the room with an atmosphere of both sorrow and profound hope. In that silent, sacred moment, Sophie's newborn daughter, cradled in her arms, reached out toward the keys. With a soft, unexpected touch, the baby pressed a single discordant note, a note that, to Daniel, was the sound of everything that had been broken and left unspoken all those years ago. Daniel leaned in close, his voice a whisper barely audible over the gentle strains of the piano. "You tuned it after all, Emmy," he murmured, words meant for the memory of Evelyn, a final bittersweet message to the woman who had given so much of herself in the hope of a love that transcended time. At that very moment, as if in a vision from another realm, the camera of memory pulled back to reveal a tender scene, the ghost of Evelyn, radiant and serene, standing beside a youthful figure, Luca, also a ghost, both smiling gently as if reassured by the final chord of the piano. The music, now in perfect harmony, wove their spirits together, a soft, eternal lullaby that promised reunion beyond the confines of this life. Next story, Autumn of the Heart, 1908. Harveston, Vermont, wore autumn like a crown. Crimson maples lined the cobblestone streets, their leaves scattering like confetti over the town square. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke and cinnamon, while pumpkins perched on porch steps like cheerful sentinels. It was a season of bonfires and woolen scarves, of apple cider sipped under skies the color of bruised peaches. Amara Hartnell first noticed Julian Reed at the town's harvest festival. He stood by the cider press, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sunlight catching the copper strands in his auburn hair. She watched as he steadied a wobbling barrel for Mrs. Lowell, the grocer's wife, his laugh warm and unhurried. Amara's gloves tightened around her basket of honey jars. She knew his name, of course. Everyone did. The Reeds were orchard keepers, their hands calloused from generations of tending apple trees. The Hartnells, meanwhile, owned the bank on Main Street, their parlor filled with crystal decanters and invitations to cotillions. Their eyes met as she passed the cider stand. Julian nodded, his gaze lingering a heartbeat too long. Amara's cheeks burned, and she told herself it was the chill. Weeks later, they collided again in the woods beyond the Hartnell estate. Amara had slipped away from her mother's luncheon, her lace dress snagging on brambles as she followed the trail of a red fox. Julian was repairing a stone wall, his shirt damp with sweat, a sketchbook peeking from his satchel. He offered her a drink from his canteen, and when their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. They began meeting in secret, a sunlit clearing where golden leaves carpeted the ground, an abandoned barn smelling of hay and dust. Julian sketched the curve of her neck with charcoal, his hands steady, but his breath unsteady. Amara brought him books of poetry, their margins filled with her looping annotations. She memorized the scar on his thumb from a childhood axe slip. He learned the way her laughter dissolved into silent, shoulder-shaking joy. For a time, the world narrowed to the rustle of leaves, the heat of his palm against her waist, the stolen hours that felt infinite. The first frost came early that year, glazing the pumpkins in the Hartnell's garden with delicate lace. Amara's mother hosted her annual autumn ball, the house ablaze with candlelight and the chatter of Boston elites. Amara wore emerald silk, her hair pinned with pearls, as her father introduced her to Charles Whitaker, a banker's son with a waxed mustache and a habit of quoting railroad prophets. "Charming, isn't he?" her mother whispered, steering her toward the terrace. "His family owns half the steel mills in Pennsylvania." Outside, Amara pressed her palms to the cold railing. Below, the garden slept under a silver veil. She thought of Julian's hands, rough and sure, cupping her face in the moonlight. Rumors began as whispers. The postmaster's wife spotted Amara returning from the woods at dawn, her hem muddy. The tailor's son claimed he saw Julian lingering near the Hartnell gates, a bundle of wild asters in hand. By November, the gossip reached Amara's father. He summoned her to his study, a room choked with the smell of leather and pipe smoke. Without a word, he slid a letter across his desk, a note Julian had tucked into her coat pocket, its edges frayed from being read and reread. "Meet me at the Old Oak, always, Jay." Amara's throat tightened. Her father's silence was worse than shouting. That night, she found Julian at their oak tree, its branches skeletal against the moon. He reached for her, but she stepped back, the truth lodging like a stone in her chest. "They'll send me away," she said. "Or worse, they'll ruin you." Julian's jaw clenched. He opened his satchel, pulling out a train ticket to Montreal. "Come with me. We'll start over." A twig snapped in the darkness. Amara's brother emerged, lantern in hand, his expression a mix of pity and disgust. The choice was made for them. Amara married Charles Whitaker on a brittle December morning, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her grip. The church bells rang, and the townsfolk agreed it was a splendid match, a merging of fortunes, a triumph of sense over sentiment. Julian left Harveston the day after the wedding. He sold the reed orchards to settle his father's debts and boarded a train west, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. The only trace he left behind was a single drawing slipped beneath the Hartnell's garden gate. Amara, as he'd first seen her, haloed by autumn leaves, her smile unguarded. Years later, when the ache had dulled to a familiar throb, Amara found the sketch in her late mother's sewing box. She traced the lines of her younger self, now a stranger, and wondered if Julian's hands still remembered the shape of her. On the outskirts of town, the old oak tree still stood. Its trunk bore the faint carving of their initials, swallowed by decades of growth. In the fall, children played beneath its branches, chasing leaves like fragments of forgotten dreams. And when the first frost came, Amara would sit by her parlor window, a widow now, sipping cider gone cold. She'd watch the maple across the street shed its fiery cloak, each falling leaf a whisper of what might have been. Next story, Rain-Soaked Promises, 1908. In the heart of Paris in 1905, when the city still retained the vintage charm of an era both elegant and fragile, there was a little cafe that served as a quiet refuge amid the urban bustle. Tucked away on a narrow cobblestone street in the Latin Quarter, Le Café des Rêves was known to locals as a place where whispered conversations and secret smiles passed as quietly as the shifting afternoon light. Its wooden tables bore the patina of years gone by, and its walls, adorned with faded posters and delicate wallpaper, held echoes of laughter and tender confessions. It was on one such bright yet cool spring morning that Camille Laurent first stepped through the cafe's creaking door. Camille was a young woman whose gentle eyes and soft smile belied an inner strength and a quiet determination. She wore a modest dress, its color a soft shade of lavender that hinted at both vulnerability and hope. In her heart, she carried dreams of love and freedom, a desire to break away from the strict expectations of her family and society, and to embrace the beauty of her own heart. That very morning, across the cafe, sat Alexandre Duval, a reserved, thoughtful young man known for his poetic nature and wistful glances out the window. Alexandre had long nurtured a secret admiration for the quiet grace of those who passed through Le Café des Rêves, and today fate had conspired to bring him face to face with Camille. With a worn notebook in hand and an air of gentle melancholy about him, he scribbled verse after verse, his eyes occasionally wandering to the door in hope of catching a glimpse of a kindred spirit. As the morning light grew softer and the clamor of Paris stirred into a gentle hum, the two found themselves drawn together by the invisible thread of shared dreams. It was as if the very air in the cafe vibrated with possibility. When Camille ordered her first cup of coffee, a delicate brew with hints of roasted hazelnut and caramel, the soft chime of the bell above the door seemed to announce the arrival of destiny. Camille's eyes met Alexandre's across the room. For a long, silent moment, the world outside the cafe faded away. In that suspended instant, every heart's secret wish was laid bare in a quiet glance, a promise of something beautiful yet unspoken. Later that morning, as the cafe's patrons chatted softly over their steaming cups of coffee, Camille found herself seated near Alexandre. Though neither had spoken a word to the other, their eyes exchanged gentle smiles and quiet nods of understanding. It was a connection that needed no grand declarations, only the simple, shared language of hope and longing. In a quiet corner of the cafe, Alexandre began to write a note on a small scrap of paper. His handwriting was neat and careful, and the words he chose were filled with tenderness. In the early light of Paris, my heart has found a kindred soul. I wonder if you too feel the stirring of a dream beneath the soft glow of dawn. He folded the note carefully, and with a shy glance around, slipped it onto the small table beside Camille's cup. When Camille noticed the folded paper resting there, her curiosity was piqued. Unfolding it slowly, she read the heartfelt words and felt her own pulse quicken. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of surprise and joy. In that moment, the cafe, with its quiet corners and vintage charm, became the stage for a secret promise, a promise that was as delicate as it was daring. Camille, emboldened by the gentle invitation, wrote her own reply on a piece of stationery that matched the faded elegance of the cafe's decor. Dear friend, your words have touched the quiet corners of my heart. I, too, dream of a love that defies the harsh dictates of convention. Let us meet again in this haven of whispered secrets. Until then, I remain with hope in my soul. She folded her note and placed it discreetly on the table where Alexandra's had been found. The silent exchange of notes began a ritual, a gentle meeting of minds and hearts that would transform each sunrise into a new promise. Over the following days, as the early morning light continued to filter through the stained glass windows of Le Café des Rêves, Camille and Alexandre exchanged more notes. Their messages were simple, yet full of emotion, each one a quiet confession of dreams, fears, and hopes. Their words, written in a language that blended poetry with everyday truth, slowly built a bridge between two souls who had long yearned for something more. One particular morning, with the soft murmur of the city barely awakening and the gentle clink of coffee cups in the background, Alexandra's note carried a special invitation. Meet me at the cafe at sunrise tomorrow. Let us share a moment before the day's hustle begins. A moment where only our hearts speak. I long for the magic of that first light when all is still and every promise feels possible. Camille's heart fluttered as she read the note. With trembling hands and a determined spirit, she resolved to meet him at the appointed time. That very next morning, before the town of Paris had fully awakened, Camille arrived at the cafe. The streets were quiet, the air cool and fresh, carrying the soft scent of dew and new beginnings. She found Alexandre already waiting at a small table by the window. The space was intimate, a quiet corner away from the bustle that allowed them to speak without the intrusion of the day's noise. As the first delicate rays of the rising sun filtered through the window, bathing the room in a gentle glow, the two kindred spirits sat close, their eyes locked in a conversation that needed no words. For a long, timeless moment, they simply sat there, allowing the beauty of the dawn to wrap around them like a soft embrace. Their hands inched closer, almost meeting in the warm light. The world outside was silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Then, just as their eyes shone with the promise of a shared future and the tender expectation of that first magical kiss, a sudden interruption shattered the quiet magic. A sharp, insistent sound broke the serene silence of the early morning. The soft murmur of the awakening city was replaced by the urgent beeping of a telegram machine in the back office of the cafe. Startled, the few early patrons in the cafe turned their attention to the source of the sound. In the midst of the hushed commotion, a messenger arrived at the door, his expression grave as he delivered a telegram to the cafe manager. The message, written in bold, hurried script, carried news that could not be ignored. It spoke of a sudden crisis, a matter of great urgency affecting the town. The telegram was posted near the entrance of the cafe for all to see. Its contents, though brief, were enough to create a ripple of anxiety among the staff and a murmur of worry among the few early risers. Alexandre and Camille, still holding each other's gaze, and on the very cusp of their first kiss, felt the sudden interruption like a cold wind. The tender moment was abruptly suspended in time, as if fate itself had decided to delay the magic of their rendezvous. Alexandra's hand slowly fell away from Camille's, and the shared warmth that had filled the small space was replaced by a quiet, bitter chill. Camille's eyes searched his, filled with silent questions and a deep, aching disappointment. Neither of them spoke, for words would only shatter the fragile magic of that moment. The telegram, a symbol of the rigid, often unyielding demands of the outside world, had intruded upon their secret haven. In its wake, the promise of that long-awaited kiss was left suspended, a bittersweet possibility that lingered in the soft glow of the sunrise. For the rest of the morning, the cafe's atmosphere shifted. The urgent tone of the telegram became a backdrop to the lingering sadness in Camille and Alexandra's eyes. The usual gentle clink of porcelain and the murmurs of conversation now carried a hint of sorrow and unfulfilled hope. In the quiet corners of the cafe, whispers of speculation arose, but none could guess the true nature of what had been interrupted. Camille sat by the window, lost in thought as she watched the sun climb higher. The beauty of the dawn, which had once filled her with a sense of infinite possibility, now seemed tinged with melancholy. In her hand, she clutched a folded note, a remnant of the secret exchange that had brought her such tender joy. Yet now the note felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of all the unanswered questions and unspoken words between them. Meanwhile, Alexandre lingered at the table, his eyes fixed on the telegram still displayed near the door. He could not shake the feeling that their secret moment was not truly lost, but merely postponed, a promise deferred by the inexorable march of duty and obligation. His heart ached with the knowledge that sometimes life, with all its rigid demands and unexpected interruptions, forced even the most tender dreams into waiting. After the initial shock had faded, Alexandre found himself writing once more. With trembling determination, he penned a new note. Dear Camille, the sunrise promised us a moment of shared hope and tender dreams, a moment that for now remains suspended in time. Though an urgent call from the world has pulled us apart, know that my heart remains with you in every quiet breath. I believe that our promise is not lost, but simply waiting for the right time to blossom. Until we meet again, let our dreams carry us through the day. Yours always, Alexandre. He folded the note carefully and left it on the table, hoping that somehow, in the quiet hours that followed, their hearts would find comfort in the promise of tomorrow. Camille, reading his words with eyes glistening with unshed tears, felt a surge of hope mingled with sorrow. She knew that the interruption was painful, yet it was also a reminder that even when life seemed determined to break their secret spell, the bond between them was resilient. That morning, as the hours passed and the urgency of the telegram faded into the background, Camille resolved that they would continue to meet at sunrise. Their interrupted moment was not an end, but the beginning of a gentle defiance, a vow to reclaim their stolen time with every new day. In the days that followed, the town of Millau, like so many small Parisian neighborhoods, returned to its daily rhythm. The urgency of the telegram became a part of everyday news, a reminder of the relentless pace of life outside the soft sanctuary of Le Café des Rêves. Yet, within the quiet corners of the café, Camille and Alexandre nurtured a secret promise. Every morning, before the town fully awakened, they would meet at their familiar table by the window. Their faces, once filled with anticipation of a long-awaited kiss, now held a tender resolve. Each sunrise became an opportunity to reclaim the moment that had been so abruptly interrupted. With each meeting, they shared not only the stolen sweetness of the early hours, but also the quiet strength to face the world's demands. One chilly morning, As the sky turned a soft shade of peach and the first hints of sunlight spread across the horizon, Camille and Alexandra met as usual. This time, the air between them was charged not only with hope, but with a sense of renewal. In the gentle light of dawn, their eyes met with a quiet understanding. "Today," Camille whispered, her voice soft yet determined, "we will let our promise be the light that guides us, no matter what interruptions may come." Alexandra smiled, a mixture of tenderness and defiance in his eyes. "Every new day is a gift, a chance to start again. Our love is that secret, cherished promise, and it will not be silenced." With those words, they leaned in once more. Slowly, as if savoring every heartbeat, they allowed themselves to come closer. Their lips almost touched, the promise of that long-awaited kiss shimmering in the space between them. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The soft glow of the sunrise, the delicate rustle of newspaper pages in the cafe, even the distant hum of the city, all faded into a quiet, sacred stillness. But just as their hearts beat as one, as though time itself had paused to bless the moment, a sudden sound shattered the reverie, a clatter from the back of the cafe. A hurried waiter burst through the door, bearing another telegram. The room erupted in murmurs as the telegram was quickly posted on the notice board near the entrance. In that instant, the tender magic between Camille and Alexandre was suspended once again. Their eyes met, filled with quiet resignation and bittersweet anticipation. Though the moment had been interrupted for the second time, it only deepened their resolve. They knew that every interruption, every delay, was only a test, a reminder that life, with all its chaos, could never entirely snuff out the gentle flame of hope that burned within them. In the weeks that followed, the secret meetings at dawn became both a ritual and a refuge. The interruptions, though painful, only strengthened the bond between Camille and Alexandre. They learned that sometimes the world would pull them apart, but their promise to meet at sunrise was a steady, recurring light that no telegram could dim. Each morning, as the cafe's doors opened and the first customers arrived, the two lovers would share a few quiet moments before the demands of the day took hold. Their words, written in hastily scribbled notes, became a gentle mantra, a repeated promise that love could persist even amidst the clamor of society. On a particularly serene morning, as the dew sparkled on the cobblestones and the soft light of dawn embraced the world, Alexandra left a note that would become their cherished refrain. "No matter how many times fate interrupts our moment, know that every sunrise renews my promise to you. Our love is like the gentle tide. It may be halted briefly, but it always returns with quiet strength." Camille read those words with a deep sense of comfort. They reminded her that even in the face of interruption, their love was resilient, a promise that the heart could endure beyond all obstacles. In their secret exchange, they found a steady rhythm, a cadence that allowed them to rise above the world's demands and cherish the beauty of each new day. Their meetings grew more meaningful with each passing sunrise. They talked about the dreams they wished to chase, the life they longed to build, and the quiet, bold defiance of following one's heart despite the weight of tradition. In those early hours, before the city stirred and the urgent telegrams returned to fade into memory, their love was a secret universe, a place where every stolen moment was a promise of hope and every shared glance a gentle defiance. Time, as it always does, moved inexorably onward. The interruptions continued, a telegram here, a sudden call there, but they no longer defined Camille and Alexandra's secret world. Instead, these interruptions became mere signposts along a journey filled with quiet persistence and tender hope. One misty morning, when the air was cool and the soft murmur of the waking city seemed a distant echo, Camille arrived at the cafe with a sense of quiet anticipation. In her hand, she carried a small, leather-bound journal, a collection of all the notes they had exchanged. That day, she decided, she would read them aloud in the privacy of their shared moment, to remind both of them how far they had come. Sitting together in their usual corner by the window, Camille opened the journal. "Listen to this," she said, her voice a gentle murmur. She read aloud. "At every sunrise, our hearts beat in quiet defiance against the cold hands of fate. Though our moments are stolen and our kisses interrupted, the promise of tomorrow is our guiding light." Alexandra listened with eyes glistening in the early light. "Your words make our secret promise even more precious," he replies softly. "Every interruption, every delay has only made our love grow stronger. It is as if each morning we are given a new chance, a fresh beginning to share what our hearts long for." They continued to read the notes they had carefully collected over those early mornings, each word a tender reminder of their shared journey. In that quiet exchange, the interruptions of the past became distant echoes, replaced by the steady cadence of hope and the quiet assurance that no matter what, they would always find each other at sunrise. As the journal's pages filled with memories of whispered dreams and gentle promises, the two lovers understood that waiting was not a burden, but a gift, a chance to savor every moment and to let their love deepen with every passing day. Their secret rendezvous was a quiet rebellion against a world that demanded conformity, a gentle assertion that love, when nurtured with care, could overcome even the harshest interruptions. On a warm spring morning, after a particularly long stretch of uninterrupted meetings, a letter arrived for Camille at the cafe. Unlike the hastily scribbled notes they had exchanged, this letter was printed on fine paper with elegant script. It was an official notice from Camille's family, summoning her back to the city immediately for an urgent matter. The letter, though polite in tone, carried the unmistakable weight of duty and expectation. When Camille read the letter, her heart sank. She knew that if she left Millau, even for a short while, the delicate balance of her secret rendezvous with Alexandra would be shattered. That morning, as she sat in their usual corner by the window, tears welled in her eyes. Alexandra reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Don't let this tear us apart," he whispered, his voice tender and full of longing. "Our love is worth every moment of separation, and every day apart only makes our promise stronger." Camille held him tightly, the bittersweet weight of their situation pressing upon both their hearts. "I must go," she said softly, "but I promise to return. Every sunrise, every quiet moment I will think of you, and our secret promise will keep me strong." They shared a long, tender embrace, a bittersweet farewell that was filled with silent vows and hopeful eyes. In that embrace, the beauty of their love was palpable, a quiet defiance against the forces that sought to pull them apart. The interruption of that morning had been a painful reminder that the world outside their secret sanctuary was relentless. Yet it also served as a testament to the strength of their bond, a bond that could weather even the harshest demands of duty and expectation. In the days that followed Camille's departure, Alexandre found himself returning to their secret meeting spot every morning, even though the empty chair beside him was a constant, aching reminder of her absence. Each sunrise, as the light slowly broke over the horizon, he would sit quietly and write in his notebook, a record of his thoughts, his dreams, and his unyielding hope that Camille would return. The cafe, too, seemed to hold its breath during those quiet mornings. In the soft glow of dawn, as Paris began to stir, there was a palpable sense of longing that filled the vintage walls of Le Café des Rêves. Patrons spoke in hushed tones about a mysterious young man whose eyes sparkled with both hope and sorrow, and who always seemed to linger at the window as if waiting for someone. Meanwhile, Camille traveled through the city on urgent business, her heart heavy with the knowledge that every moment away from Alexandre was a moment lost from their secret promise. In her spare time, she would return to the quiet corners of her hotel room and read through the collection of notes they had exchanged, each word a gentle reminder of the love that awaited her in the hidden garden of the cafe. One rainy morning, as Camille waited for a brief respite between meetings, she found herself wandering back to a familiar corner of the city, a small park where the first rays of dawn had always held a special meaning for her. There, under the shelter of an old oak tree, she scribbled a note with trembling hands. Dear Alexandre, every sunrise without you is a gentle ache in my heart. I long for the day when our secret meetings will be no longer interrupted, when our stolen moments can bloom without fear. Until then, let our promise be the light that guides us back to each other. Yours, in every quiet note, Camille. When she managed to send her note discreetly back to the cafe, Alexandre received it with a mixture of joy and sorrow. His eyes read every word slowly, as though the very sound of her voice were carried in the gentle script. Though the interruption had kept them apart for now, the promise of their next meeting shone like a beacon in the soft, gray morning. After many long weeks of separation, when the demands of Camille's duty finally lessened, she returned to the quiet refuge of Le Café des Rêves. The moment she stepped through the door, a hush fell over the room, as if every corner of the vintage cafe held its breath in anticipation. Alexandre was there, seated in their usual spot by the window, his eyes fixed on the doorway as though he had been waiting an eternity. When Camille saw him, the world seemed to pause. In that long, lingering moment, all the words written in notes and whispered in secret meetings came rushing back. Their eyes met, and without a word, they both knew that the promise they had made in the soft light of countless sunrises was as true as ever. They moved slowly toward each other, the distance between them shrinking with every heartbeat. In a moment that was both tender and suspenseful, a moment that carried the quiet weight of all the mornings they had spent apart, they leaned in for a kiss. Their lips were almost touching when a sudden noise startled them both. From behind the counter, a sharp clatter rang out. A waiter had accidentally knocked over a tray of cups. For a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to halt once more. The soft murmur of conversation, The gentle hum of the cafe and the tender anticipation of their first kiss all hung in the air like a delicate promise waiting to be fulfilled. In that suspended second, their kiss remained incomplete, a tender, bittersweet moment frozen in time. They pulled back slowly, their faces flushed with a mixture of desire and dismay. Neither spoke immediately, for words would have shattered the fragile beauty of that moment. Instead, they exchanged a look that said all that needed to be said, that their love, though repeatedly interrupted, would always endure. In the years that followed, the story of Camille and Alexandre became a quiet legend in Millau. The bustling Parisian cafe, with its vintage charm and secret corners, was forever marked by their interrupted rendezvous, a symbol of tender defiance, of stolen moments that defied the rigid expectations of the world around them. Though life continued in all its unpredictable beauty, with new telegrams, unexpected interruptions, and the relentless march of duty, Camille and Alexandre's promise remained unbroken. Every sunrise, every gentle glow of dawn was a reminder that love could overcome even the most sudden, bittersweet interruptions. They continued to meet in secret, exchanging handwritten notes and sharing quiet smiles across crowded rooms, their silent defiance a beacon of hope for all who believed that the heart's desire could never truly be silenced. In the gentle twilight of their later years, as the cafe aged gracefully along with them, they would sometimes return to the table where it all began. With weathered hands and eyes that still sparkled with youthful hope, they would read through the collection of notes that chronicled their secret rendezvous, a treasure trove of whispered promises and dreams that had carried them through the hardest of times. For Camille and Alexandre, the interrupted kiss had become more than just a moment of missed opportunity. It had become a symbol of life's unpredictable beauty. Their love, like the first light of dawn, was both fragile and enduring, a gentle promise that no matter how many times the world might interrupt, hope would always rise with the sun. Thank you for spending this time with me. The story may be over, but the gentle rain will keep you company a little longer. Let it wash away the worries of the day. Rest well, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. Good night.